So a friend of mine had an interesting idea where two bands connected by a wave and these specific color gemstones, how it was going to be put together. And I thought, well, let's do it. So I started my first sketch, and with the colors purple, red, and teal blue, I thought, oh, they're cooler colors typically, so white gold is what I initially was thinking, but I was figuring out like the structure part of it. Now, sketching's always been kind of like tricky for me. I used to be really good at drawing years ago, like 15 years ago, and then I just didn't keep it up. And I regret that. I really do, because it just made things so much harder when I had to start sketching again and wanted to just get back into it, and just for my own like pleasure and stuff like that. And I it's just a really awesome hobby as well. I mean, it's good for like my work, but it's just such a great like minimalist hobby, really, unless you really get in all the mediums and the different types of, you know, colored pencils and the markers and stuff. But I went through a point where I put away like all my drawing supplies. I still kept my sketchbooks, but I made sure to finish them. I have just really two. And, well, no, never mind. I had one. And one that I kept, that I actually finished. And it's a good one. I've had it since like high school, and so, but art class was obviously one of my favorite classes. I like most of my classes. I really have. But drawing was just something like, when I was younger, it did come naturally to me, but I still had to work at it. And my favorite, like, basically my favorite types of things to draw was people, their faces and portraits, and jewelry, obviously. And the awesome thing about drawing jewelry was that I got to, it's just shapes. So I just have to get good at drawing shapes, and then it turns out pretty good. So with this ring, it started off, like I said, white gold, but then eventually needed to be yellow gold. So I was like, okay, now this is going to be a little more interesting. The colors kind of are, like I said, cooler. So with a warm metal, how is this going to work? So now we start off with a trillion cut, center cut gemstone, which I was just super excited about. It is going to be moissanite, but I never get to like make rings with a trillion cut stone very often. And when I do see them, it's just, I don't know, they look pretty neat. They got a nice like shape to them and stuff. Now, I kind of went a little overboard with some of the waves. I focused too hard on the gems and the waves and not the actual shape of the waves. So I had to just try to figure out like, well, they need to be twisted. That's the important thing. And it had to be like a ribbon type of twist, not just like a rope or anything. So I had to be smart about it, but at the same time for it not to be too bulky but still interesting to look at. So I focused really hard on the gemstones. Like I had several different like color combinations, and completely just kept changing the waves, but not too much. And what kind of was frustrating was the bars that connected the waves and the two bands. Like initially this ring was gonna be hollow, but there's just so much going on that eventually I just had to kind of make it solid, but still have some sort of like a inside type of gallery holding all the pieces together. And so the bars were originally going to be like, I was going to throw in some like stones in there too, but then it just got to be like too much, and it took away from the center stone, and then it just kind of made the ring too busy. So one of the rules I learned over the years, in my experience, the center stone obviously has to take center stage whenever you're designing a ring. You can make it as busy as you want, but the center stone has to be basically the center of attention, and that's the first thing you look at. If you look at all the other stuff and then you see the center stone, it kind of not only makes it too busy, but it also kind of like hides the ring. In a weird way it does. I've seen rings that are beautiful, but I have to physically look at the center stone And then because I noticed all the other designs first, and I'm sure plenty of people like that style, but however, it doesn't have that wow factor to it. And you can only really do that with bands that have no center stone. If you just remove that, then just go all out with all the designs inside and things like that. So over the years, I've had a love-hate relationship with drawing. Because I stopped doing it for so long, and only until like, I would say maybe 5 years ago, I started really picking it up again. And the more I've done it, the more like I want to do it, and the better I want to get. And it just kind of sparked that joy of creating again. But at the same time, it would be really frustrating because I had to make this sketch believable and make it look as realistic as possible. But I was just always super frustrated with my jewelry sketches, funny enough, because like I wanted a specific rendering style, but for some reason my drawings they would turn into more like fashion design type of style. And then it that's what I noticed, and it actually looks, I kind of like them now, honestly, because before I was like, ugh, this looks so amateurish, and they probably do, but for the most part, they get the concept across. And honestly, now I kind of appreciate them, and I was just like, oh, they're colorful, and they have the shape down. Now, there's some, obviously, technical things that I still have to work on, such as bands, for instance, because they just have this specific oval-looking shape and a specific way to draw it. Now, during rendering, there are techniques, but for the most part, people just kind of like freehand them, but they like to take out measurements and stuff like that and really get super like technical with all the fine lines and all that. So, but the drawing that I have done has just been digital drawing. I use this program called Krita, and it's just on my laptop. It's a Surface Pro, so I can like draw on it. And I stopped sketching on normal sketchbooks and using color pencils and things like that, because I can easily just send the digital pictures out and post them and stuff like that. It's just way easier versus like taking a picture and then it looks kind of distorted and it just doesn't look good. Even if you make it into a PDF file, it's kind of weird. So over the years, I've gotten a little better at drawing shapes, funny enough, but I've been working on it a lot more seriously this year. Well, last year is what I meant to say. This year, it just started, so. I used to be so good at drawing that I drew this realistic skull that was the assignment in art class, and I actually got accused of cheating by one of the classmates. And so then I thought, really, man? Like, come on. But apparently my proportion was really good that it looked like I just put the paper over and traced it. So I was like, you know what? That's actually kind of a compliment, even though it's kind of strange. But however, I didn't keep it up, and my skills just dropped with drawing. Huge difference from back then. So for this ring, ideally the prongs that would hold it would be in between the two bands, and that it would actually twist up from both sides of both bands. That's kind of what the concept was. But as far as the twist, it was hard to wrap around my mind around a ribbon twisting, but then I thought, well, kind of like a DNA shape, and I was like, oh, I could kind of do something like that, except without the little lines in between. And so that was kind of the most important thing. And when I worked on the prong head, I didn't quite sketch out the shape as well as I wanted to, but I was trying to get the twisting, not motion, but the twisting shape to it. Because in my head, I was inspired off of a tornado type of look. And that's why I said this was kind of not any kind of ring I've ever like put together or even like thought of. So I thought, how on earth am I gonna make a tornado ring? I have no idea. But I probably was overthinking it. So That's tend to something I do actually. It's kind of annoying how much I overthink things. So as I was putting together the halo, or at least making the shape of it around the trillion cut, I was just like messing around with all the filigree and the connection bars, which ended up being like I was adding baguettes to them as possible stone options or something. I don't know. But it kind of is that way they can kind of just remain lighter initially. But what I started liking about this sketch was kind of reminded me of like a circus, and I always like the circus. I think it's really cool and just fun, and I never actually seen a real circus, but I've seen like movies like based off of it, and like a lot of films that were just like I don't know, fun and all that. So, or at least I like the aesthetic of it. So that's kind of what came to my mind. I never like mentioned this out loud, but I was just like, oh, this will be a cool ring just to have with all the gemstones and different colors in a halo that kind of has waves with all the design elements to it. And then I thought about like, well, let's just maybe focus on the gold portion and just make sure the waves are what they should be or the right shape. And then I could do the gemstones on both bands on the outside so that it could be a little more even, maybe. And then it just it didn't quite hit. It wasn't quite there. So some was missing and there was just not enough dimension or something, or maybe it was too busy. And also too, my trillium was a bit small, so it's kind of hard to visualize. And I kind of like with this sketch, I did break my one rule, which is like making sure the center stone isn't like hidden. It needs to be center stage, but with this sketch, it kind of was a little smaller than what I used when I made this ring. So the gemstone colors were intentionally picked out. His fiance's favorite color was blue teal, and his was purple, and the red symbolized their relationship to each other. And so that's kind of why this had to kind of just work out and be intentionally placed for the design of this ring. They all had to be in a certain pattern, so I had to just constantly reflect that. And as far as the filigree, I added some more waves so that it can kind of just turn towards the stone, and then it would kind of just like make it so where the waves would look like as if the stone was about to turn, like kind of like a motion ring, but not really. So that's kind of what's going with it. Waves that turns the center stone like a tornado does. The funny thing about being in the jewelry industry as a professional is that majority of companies don't actually do sketches before they start the renders. And they just skip straight into all the CAD design and then like have, a CAD fee and things like that, and then it takes time to send all those renders in. And so I just find it really funny because a lot of things could be just like fixed and fleshed out if majority of them would do sketches first. Because, for example, CAD designs, they take around, some of them, they can take around an hour, some can be like 6 hours, and then ones that require like sculpting, for instance, those can take up to like 16 hours. So it's just those things that take that length of time, you don't really want to have to keep redoing. But yeah, I always find it funny that they just skip that step typically, because people want a specific design in their head to be like shown to them, but they want to see like what the designers come up with too. And when you put a lot of pressure on them to tell them like, well, it's gonna be a while, and they're like, okay. But for the most part, most people don't mind like waiting for sure, but sometimes having to do multiple designs just takes so much time. So versus just quick sketches like this, I can just remove so much headache. And for this ring, I've done about, I had a lot of variations. So like 3 main designs, but I've done 3 versions of those types of main designs. I guess it probably doesn't make sense, but basically one portion, and then I'll have just a filigree, and then other portion nothing, and then the other portion just has the bars, and so on and so forth. So if you're in a jewelry store and you want a custom job, try to I would suggest either have some of your own sketches, and it'll help the designers give them idea, and you don't always get to talk to them either. Usually you just talk directly to the front office and sales and things like that. Or at least have the sales work with you and just have them draw sketches also. That's something I would suggest, is to have sketches ready or create something in writing or a small thumbnail of a picture of some sort. Otherwise, they might just pick whatever, and then they'll still look great, but it may not be what you were thinking of. Sketching on my laptop was just really tricky for me to learn. Not only just getting back to drawing again, but using a completely different tool, and that was kind of frustrating. Eventually I got a nice screen that kind of has gritty matte finish to it, so my pen can kind of just not be so slippery. That was the most annoying thing about it. So that helped, but also too, sometimes the program will change buttons or something, and do this weird thing with my pen, and if my side of my hand touches a certain way, then it just turns something else on. I'm like, stop. But anyway, and I have seen artists use those little gloves to avoid that, so I probably need to get one of those for myself. I used to draw jewelry super tiny, as if it was as in scaled, so an inch or something like that. But over the years, I just kind of had to blow the design up and make it a lot larger and just easier to see. And then sometimes I'll add pictures of the gems to it, or pictures of the inspiration, or sometimes not. It kind of depends how it looks and what information I have to work with. So as I was sketching this and figuring out okay, it's starting to get more fleshed out and starting to make sense. The design's finally becoming more intentional. Now, one of the tricky things for me as designing is that my jeweler brain tends to freak out and get all cut up with, how is this gonna fit? How is this gonna work? How am I gonna build it? How is this gonna be worn? And things like that. And it just really gets in the way of actually coming up with something at all because then I just sort of freeze, or I'm just kind of going over things that I already know how to do instead of really challenge myself and just make something different and new. And so I had to really fight hard to turn my jeweler brain off and just bring out my artist brain. And that was definitely tricky, but it was worth it, because then I could finally start actually designing for real and just making it how it's gonna look. Because if it doesn't look right, then it's not gonna be beautiful, and that completely removes all purpose of making an engagement ring. The other funny thing about the artist brain is that I can be a little bit out of control, because otherwise nothing makes sense. That's the issue, is that I have to figure out oh, maybe it's not gonna work. So that's kind of why towards the middle I'm this is getting too busy. I actually had to eventually I had to simplify this ring and just focus on the main things that was the most important. And so I just kept with the waves that had that twist, and the trilling cut in the center, and the colored gemstones. And so I decided to like kind of just have some of the more prominent colors towards the top. So after all this, I definitely was, funny enough, more inspired with the middle portion of the sketches. And I kind of was like, oh, you know what? This will be a pretty fun collection one day. Like I said, it's like a circus inspired like jewelry, which is like crazy and kind of weird, but I really like where that was going. For myself personally, I totally would do like a halo with multiple types of like colors, with red being more prominent, and maybe add some purple or maybe some light pink to it. That's probably what I would do for myself. And then I'll definitely keep the trillion cut, and I might even like look into making the trillion cut head like earrings, and just having that cool like twisting motion to it. When I was finally reaching towards the end, I was just like, I have no idea how this is gonna look when I'm actually building this ring. So, but that's part of the fun of like making new projects. And there you have it, the winning design. I had to simplify things, but I could at least add a couple twists and my filigree type of look. I wanted to symbolize all the waves, to have the center stone just kind of give it a nice twist to it. And it just added like more interesting dimension to it. And so I appreciate everybody for listening to me talk and watching me make this sketch, and well, multiple sketches really, and going from something completely different to this. And thanks for watching.